All right, welcome everyone. It's a privilege to join you all today via Zoom, and we look forward to a great dialogue about the role of the TRIPS waiver in tackling the access to essential medicines crisis in the context of COVID. My name is Jennifer Nguyen, and I'm a hospital doctor and currently a clinical instructor at the University of Toronto in Canada. I've been active in the access to medicines field for the past 8 years, and I currently serve as the North American representative for UAEM's Global Executive Committee.
Hello, I'm Declan. I'm a first-year law student at the University of Victoria, also in Canada, and I'm currently a member of the North American Coordinating Committee for UAEM, and I'm a part of the leadership team for the Free the Vaccine campaign.
So I'll just give a brief overview about today's presentation. I'll just go over who UAEM is, UAEM's campaign to free the vaccine, what has happened over the past 4 seasons in improving equitable access to the vaccine, and the TRIPS waiver. And I'm just going to start off by giving a brief introduction about UAEM's founding. So UAEM is an international student-led nonprofit organization which works on access to essential medicines issues and intellectual property. Today, as you all know, we're currently still living in a global pandemic, and UAEM's history actually began at a moment not unlike ours right now with the global HIV/AIDS pandemic. The role that students played at Yale University back in 2001 changed the way a life-saving drug was licensed, and this helped ensure that Doctors Without Borders and other nonprofit organizations could help treat people who were living with HIV for the first time. And just wanted to also mention that while UAEM is a student-driven organization, we do have the support of our board and advisory board, which includes leaders from Doctors Without Borders, Partners in Health, Harvard Law School, Johns Hopkins Public Health, Yale Law School, and McGill University. So UAEM's founding story began with Stavudine, which was a new HIV treatment drug at the time. Stavudine was discovered by Yale researchers and exclusively licensed in 2001 to Bristol Myers Squibb. And then in 2002, BMS earned $443 million and then paid Yale $40 million per year for this drug. But at the time, the prices for this drug were still too high for HIV patients to access in low and middle income countries. So after a lot of public pressure from Yale law students, researchers, Doctors Without Borders, Yale and Bristol Myers Squibb allowed South Africa's leading generic manufacturer to produce a generic version of Stavudine. And this actually ended up reducing the price by over 100-fold, which really increased the accessibility to this drug. So it went from over $10K per year per patient to only $87 per year for each patient. And on top of this, the Dean of Yale Public Health noted that this patient pricing concession didn't cause Yale to lose any money. So moving forward since 2001, we've had a lot of different successes, most recently with Sutezolid, and currently with Emory and another COVID drug. And since then, UAM has really expanded, and we have a very strong base in North America, Europe, Latin America, and we have a growing presence in Asia, South Africa, and Australia. And so I'll just give a brief overview about Free the Vaccine. And this is also just part of our advocacy work at the WHO. So Free the Vaccine was split over 4 different seasons with different aims at each point. So the first one was more targeted towards creative advocacy and public engagement. The second one more about institutional engagement. And then season 3 was more focused on the TRIPS waiver. And currently we're more working on the Moderna vaccine and manufacturing. So for Free the Vaccine season 1, this was launched at the start of the pandemic in March 2020, and it was mainly dedicated to onboarding members and increasing general public awareness and engagement in the role of intellectual property in access to medicines issues. So we had weekly meetings that were mainly devoted to 4 different things: learning about creative activism, learning about access to medicines, sharing the actions of different groups and coming up with missions for future weeks, as well as building and engaging a creative activism community within the access to medicines field. So just some outcomes from our first season were a lot of different posters and creative activism about equitable access to the COVID vaccine. Participants even made some posters that were hosted in an exhibit that was hosted by multiple universities. And then when Dolly Parton donated $1 million for the COVID vaccine to Vanderbilt University, this gave a great opportunity to connect with pop culture. So one of our teams rewrote Dolly's hit Jolene and then rejigged the lyrics with the word vaccine. And so these are just some of the dozens of tactics and projects that the teams were creating during Free the Vaccine, creating them, testing them out to see which ones resonate best with different audiences. So in Free the Vaccine Season 2, we further engaged with students and universities about equitable access to the vaccine. And one of the outcomes from this was actually the generation of a COVID-19 mapping platform. And this was a global research project with more than 50 students across 16 different countries, investigating the role of public funding behind the development of COVID-19 vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. So our findings showed that the enormous role of public funding behind development of the COVID vaccine across multiple countries. And just looking at our results here, the top 4 institutions who received public funds actually consist of the leading COVID-19 vaccine pharmaceutical companies. So we have Moderna, AstraZeneca, GSK, and Pfizer at the top 4. And in total, they actually received more than 8 billion US taxpayer funds as of December 2020, which is almost a year ago at this point. And so you can see how much public funding has played an important role in developing the COVID vaccine. Another paper from this research group from Keystra and al. Found that with FOIA requests, the AstraZeneca vaccine research and development was actually 98% supported by public funds. So in this project, our search didn't capture the full extent of R&D investment in COVID, since we were relying on publicly available sources. And you can find the full discussion on this in our white paper at publicmedsforcovid.org. And so with our mapping projects and the automated platform, we actually got recognition from the World Health Organization in the past year. And this project was included in the WHO Global Observatory on Health Research and Development. So this just goes to show how much there's been an increase in discussion about the significant role of public funding in supporting COVID-19 vaccine research and development. And I'm just going to pass it over to Declan.
Hello, so I'm going to be talking a bit more about Season 3 and Season 4 of Free the Vaccine. In Season 3 of the Free the Vaccine campaign, which started in February of this year, we shifted our focus away from universities. Right? We had really been focused on trying to get them to share their intellectual property, but we felt that that was too narrow of a focus, and we wanted to move on to more varied targets. In addition to universities, we decided to target the public and publicly funded institutions. We wanted to take a multi-pronged approach, and we had several objectives, and activists were organized into labs and squads according to their interests. There were 3 main labs subdivided into 6 squads. The first lab was based around publicly funded institutions. They focused on getting governments to support policies and/or demonstrate leadership to ensure that enough vaccines would be manufactured to meet the needs of people everywhere. The second lab was universities. They continued the work from previous seasons, focusing on getting research universities to pledge to make their COVID-related research publicly accessible via a mechanism called the Open COVID Pledge, which would commit them to licensing their technology freely. The final lab was focused on the public. They tried to change the public discourse by providing people with an improved radical understanding of publicly funded medicines and making a case for why sharing COVID-related intellectual property is the key to ending the pandemic in a global sense. Within the publicly funded institutions lab, there was the Trip Out Lab. They were composed of university students, artists, people from many walks of life who wanted to see how they could affect public institutions and governments, either directly or indirectly. They had 2 specific objectives. First, to get 5 or more national level leaders to take a public position statement on the TRIPS Waiver by the end of the season. Second, to add an additional 2,000 signatures to the Right to Cure European Citizens Initiative, which aims to ensure that the European Commission does everything in its power to make anti-pandemic vaccines and treatments a global public good, freely accessible to everyone. So why did we identify the TRIPS waiver as a means to achieve our overall goal of ensuring affordable access to the COVID-19 vaccine? The primary reason is that it is the most powerful, effective, and autonomy-granting method. It would eliminate significant barriers to vaccine access in low and middle-income countries. This is our preferred method at UAEM and at Free the Vaccine, because we're not a fan of donation regimes. Lower and middle-income countries should not have to depend on the generosity of richer nations, and it is not a sustainable plan for protection. For example, as of October, COVID-19 Vaccines Global Access, COVAX, one of the main donation regimes, which uses donations from governments and charitable foundations, has vastly underperformed. They targeted 2 billion doses delivered to countries, but have only shipped 371 million. That's unacceptable. The vast gulf between what they committed to and what they have delivered needs to be bridged. Likewise, the world we're living in is not normal right now. This is a global pandemic in which millions have died, and we believe that there is a moral obligation to act. Because there are already significant barriers, we need to take any and all possible steps to make vaccines accessible. Additionally, it should be in the self-interest of upper-income nations to make the vaccine accessible, because no one wants problematic variants arising in countries when those variants are easily prevented. And in our globalized world, it is impossible to stop the spread of variants. The argument that manufacturing capacity is non-existent, and that is the reason that intellectual property shouldn't be waived, is a weak argument. There are manufacturers outside the US and Europe willing to manufacture the vaccine. Lower and middle income countries have indicated that they want to manufacture vaccines, working through the World Health Organization COVID-19 mRNA Vaccine Technology Transfer Hub. Sharing the technological know-how and permitting production to move forward will save lives. It's the only justifiable step. Throughout the season, the Trip Out Squad took various actions in their advocacy. They sent letters to government officials, they designed memes, they created posters with QR codes, created TikToks, and more. Here are just a few examples. And they were trying both to raise awareness, but more importantly than that, inspire action. Awareness without action was not a goal of the campaign, because when we look at what we are trying to achieve, mere awareness will not get us there. Whether people are aware of a problem is irrelevant if they do not act upon it. Another one of the main focuses of the Free the Vaccine campaign is finding alternative ways to advocate. There's a strong focus on artistic activism, but also building, testing out prototypes, and finding out which ones work and which ones don't. We recognize that some of our ideas are ultimately fruitless. But to discover that, we need to try them out, and ideally in that experimentation, we draw further inspiration as well as concrete ideas. One of the biggest successes of season 3 was the Rally for a People's Vaccine in May outside the White House. Activists gathered with costumes and signs to demand that Biden free the vaccine and share the vaccine. The day of that DC rally, Biden's administration took the unprecedented step of supporting the TRIPS waiver, and images of our rally were shared in the New York Times, Washington Post, and The Guardian. As frustrating as the lack of further agreement on the TRIPS waiver has been, it is important to recognize victories where and when we can. The DC rally is also a perfect example of artistic activism. In this case, we broke down a technical message, sharing intellectual property and waiving patents through the TRIPS waiver, into a simple one: sharing is caring. You didn't need to understand the TRIPS waiver or its complexities to understand the solution we were advocating for. It is also an example of both the power of nostalgia and the attention that artistic activism draws. It is harder to ignore protesters when they are dressed up as Care Bears, and both the costumes and the slogan should ideally bring people back to their childhood. The power of emotional draws is extreme, so we want to inspire emotion as much as possible. In the current season of Free the Vaccine, which started a few weeks ago, we are fully focused on convincing Moderna to share their intellectual property, their technical knowledge that is required to produce the vaccine. Why? Because the current situation is untenable, and Moderna has taken so much public money and work and used it solely for their advantage. Currently, the push for booster shots is further evidence of the need for patent waivers. 27% of people in low and lower middle income countries have received a first dose, but that number is over 70% in many high and upper middle income countries. In low income countries, only 3.6% of people have received their first dose. With the addition of booster doses, that means hundreds of millions of vaccine doses will be used to further protect those who need it least. If Moderna will not share their vaccine recipe, then using booster shots is literally taking a potential first dose away from someone else. An unconscionable decision because of the relative effectiveness of that shot. Our process for convincing Moderna to share their intellectual property is first, through an iterative process using small group collaboration, develop hundreds of ideas for images, slogans, and messages, pressuring Moderna to share their technology. Next, we'll develop dozens of prototypes for campaigns and test prototypes with the public to see which ones work best. After, we develop and document the best prototypes, and then we share our tested, proven campaign ideas with the larger community and use them to force Moderna to share with the world. Currently, we're in the prototype development stage. And the audience is a critical component of this campaign. We are not targeting people who don't believe in vaccines, nor people who are so opposed to the idea of sharing intellectual property that we couldn't get a conversation started. Instead, we are targeting people who believe that vaccines are safe and effective, but are not already engaged in this activism. This audience is key because many people have a narrow understanding of the current situation with Moderna. Most view them as a hero of the pandemic for providing the vaccine. And the provision of the vaccine is a laudable achievement. But the lack of recognition of the public's role and the inaction of Moderna in helping others is a necessary point to get across. The recent Moderna spat with the US government further demonstrates the importance of waiving patents, because Moderna is not a good faith actor that we can trust will act for the best of the world. Moderna and the US government are currently in a dispute over patent applications covering key aspects of the Moderna vaccine. Moderna did not name government scientists as co-inventors in 3 patent applications covering the composition of the spike protein sequence encoded by their vaccine. The National Institute of Health, the NIH, says it designed the spike protein and sent it to Moderna. However, Moderna says it finalized the sequence with the NIH, but its scientists independently designed the sequence in parallel. In essence, they say it compared notes with the NIH, but did not depend upon their research. Federal scientists are only acknowledged in 1 patent application covering a method of use for their vaccine. The NIH is understandably angry. They asked Moderna to name federal scientists as co-inventors for a sequence patent application, and Moderna said no. They are directly benefiting off of the public work of government scientists and received over $2.5 billion in public funding, yet give no credit to where it is due. Moderna also worked for years as partners with the NIH in the development of mRNA vaccines generally, but didn't hesitate to cut them off when it was the most profitable avenue. Trusting in the goodwill and intentions of pharmaceutical companies is not an avenue that we can depend upon to end the global pandemic and maximize the number of lives saved. It is in the nature of corporations to maximize profits, and often the path to do so conflicts with what is right. Moderna could share the recipe for their vaccine and make significant profits, but without public pressure or government intervention, they will not do so. Why would they take any path that would lessen their profits? This is why the TRIPS waiver is such an important step for the world to take. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out at info@uam.org.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.